Forget what the movies told you about gunfighting in the Old West. The methods that kept men breathing in smoke-filled saloons and sun-baked streets weren't the textbook stances you practice at today's shooting ranges. They were raw, desperate, and often suicidal techniques forged when survival depended on split-second decisions and your willingness to do whatever it took. Today, we're exposing 20 gunfighting methods so extreme, so completely alien to modern firearms doctrine, they'll shatter everything you thought you understood about frontier combat. These weren't competition techniques refined on safe ranges. They were kill-or-be-killed tactics developed in an era where your next breath relied on speed, instinct, and methods that would get you thrown off any modern firing line. Number 20, point shooting by feel. When sights became worthless, picture yourself inside a frontier saloon in 1878. Gun smoke hangs thick enough to cut with a knife, whiskey fumes burn your nostrils, and the only light comes from a few flickering oil lamps that barely illuminate the card tables. Now, try using that tiny brass bead on your revolver's barrel. Frontier gunfighters learned fast that traditional aiming was a fantasy they couldn't afford. Point shooting, sometimes called instinctive shooting, meant pulling the trigger base purely on where your gun barrel pointed relative to your body, completely ignoring the sights. Your pointing finger became your aiming mechanism, naturally indicating the target while your trigger finger did the actual work. Professional gunmen drilled this method relentlessly, investing hours into drawing and dry firing until the revolver became a natural extension of their pointing hand. The tactical advantage was enormous. While adversaries wasted critical fractions of a second trying to line up sights in terrible lighting and thick smoke, point shooters were already putting rounds downrange. Saloon shootouts, alley ambushes, and sudden close-range encounters heavily favored this approach. Wild Bill Hickok allegedly practiced point shooting every single day, building reflexes so refined he could draw and hit center mass without deliberate thought. The method had severe limitations, though. Past 15 yards, accuracy fell apart completely without proper sight alignment. Modern shooters, programmed from their first range session to use their sights religiously, typically can't develop enough trust in their instincts to make point shooting work effectively. Number 19, the border shift. Death disguised as surrender. Imagine you're a territorial lawman in 1882, ordering a suspected outlaw to hand over his weapon. He complies immediately, offering his revolver grip first like an honest citizen. You reach to accept it, and suddenly he spins the gun in his hand, his finger slides into the trigger guard, and you're staring down your own barrel. That's the border shift, among the most treacherous tricks frontier gunfighters ever developed. Also known as the road agent spin, this move exploited the vulnerability during weapon transfer. The original holder would offer the gun grip forward but maintain rotational control, then flip the revolver 180 degrees while simultaneously positioning their trigger finger. Outlaws and professional gamblers treasured this deception because it transformed apparent compliance into instant advantage. The maneuver demanded incredible hand-eye coordination and months of practice. The technique became so synonymous with betrayal that seasoned lawmen refused accepting handed weapons at all, instead requiring suspects to place their guns on the ground. Number 18. Fanning the hammer. The Hollywood myth that was actually real. What do you do when you need shots faster than humanly possible? You fan the hammer, converting your revolver into a primitive automatic weapon. Hollywood exaggerated this, but frontier gunfighters employed fanning in desperate circumstances. Lock the trigger back while slapping the hammer's spur, enabling shooters to empty 6 chambers under 2 seconds. John Wesley Hardin used fanning during an 1872 saloon fight in Gonzales County, Texas. Emptying his revolver so rapidly, witnesses believed he discharged a shotgun. Fanning carried catastrophic disadvantages. Accuracy became random beyond arm's reach, destroyed components, and burned ammunition instantly. Gunfighters treated it as desperation, facing multiple attackers at close range, where volume mattered more than precision. Number 17, the cavalry draw from saddle, when your holster wasn't on your hip. Picture yourself racing across open prairie on horseback, hostile warriors closing distance fast, and you desperately need your sidearm. Except your revolver sits in a pommel holster attached to your saddle, not strapped to your belt. The cavalry draw addressed this unique challenge with methods completely unknown to modern shooters. Mounted troops and working cowboys developed specialized drawing techniques that compensated for the horse's motion, the rider's seated position, and the unconventional holster location. The standard method involved reaching forward and downward with the shooting hand, gripping the revolver and drawing it upward and back in a sweeping arc that positioned the muzzle toward the threat, while the rider leaned backward in the saddle. This motion required practice until it became pure muscle memory, because mistakes while mounted could mean dropping your weapon, shooting your horse, or losing your balance completely. Cavalry units drilled this draw endlessly, frequently practicing at full gallop to develop the reflexes necessary for actual combat. Captain Samuel Walker, whose collaboration with Samuel Colt produced the Walker revolver, created specific cavalry draw methods that became mandatory training for Texas Rangers during the 1840s. His system emphasized minimal wasted motion and maintaining rein control while drawing. The cavalry draw demanded completely different body mechanics than a standard standing draw from a belt holster. Modern mounted shooters occasionally rediscover these techniques, typically struggling significantly because the movement patterns directly contradict everything contemporary instruction teaches. The technique required coordinating multiple complex movements simultaneously while controlling a moving animal. Number 16. Hip shooting. No time to aim meant firing from the waist. Imagine facing a situation where bringing your revolver up to eye level guarantees your death. Your opponent already has their weapon clearing leather, and you're running half a second behind. Hip shooting, firing from waist height, without raising the weapon to eye level, provided frontier gunfighters a crucial speed edge in these desperate moments. The method involved drawing the revolver and firing while it remained at hip level, using body alignment and pure instinct rather than sights to direct the round. Shooters would rotate their hips and shoulders toward the threat, essentially aiming their entire upper body at the target while the gun naturally followed. Wild Bill Hickok's legendary 1865 showdown with Davis Tutt in Springfield, Missouri, actually involved a carefully aimed shot at 75 yards. But numerous other documented Hickok gunfights featured hip shooting at close distances. The technique let him deliver fire fractionally faster than opponents attempting conventional aiming. Hip shooting's effectiveness collapsed beyond 10 yards, but inside the cramped confines of saloons, gambling establishments, and narrow alleys where most gunfights happened, that range limitation rarely posed problems. What mattered was getting your first shot off, regardless of whether it was perfectly aimed. The psychological effect was substantial as well. Adversaries expecting a standard draw and aim sequence suddenly faced incoming rounds before they had finished their own draw. That shock frequently proved lethal. Modern tactical shooting has rediscovered hip shooting variations called retention position or speed rock, but the original Old West hip shooting methods emphasized even more instinctive, rougher techniques that relied purely on body mechanics. Number 15. The slip gun modification. Speed through mechanical tampering. What if you could have your trigger pull time by eliminating the trigger completely? The slip gun modification transformed ordinary revolvers into hair-trigger killing machines that fired at the slightest pressure, a modification so hazardous it endangered its owner as much as any enemy. Gunsmiths and shooters produced slip guns by filing down or entirely removing the trigger and its mechanisms, leaving only the hammer functional. To fire, the shooter pulled the hammer back slightly, then released it, letting even microscopic pressure drop the hammer and discharge the weapon. Some versions retained a minimal trigger, requiring virtually no pressure. The modification enabled incredibly rapid shooting, particularly when combined with fanning. A proficient shooter could achieve firing rates that seemed impossible with standard revolvers. Billy the Kid allegedly carried a slip gun during his final year, though solid historical documentation remains questionable. Slip guns were extraordinarily hazardous, though. Dropping the revolver might fire it. Bumping the hammer against any surface might fire it. Holstering carelessly might fire it. Multiple gunfighters shot themselves with their own slip guns before ever confronting an adversary. Professional gunsmiths cautioned strongly against the modification, but desperate men seeking every possible speed advantage sometimes pursued it regardless. Some territorial law enforcement agencies actually prohibited slip guns, classifying them as too dangerous for civilian ownership. Modern firearms laws would categorize most slip gun modifications as illegal alterations creating unsafe weapons. No legitimate gunsmith today would perform such work. and competitive shooting organizations explicitly ban them for safety reasons. Number 14. Thumbing the hammer back, single-action speed mastery. Picture the fluid, practiced motion of a frontier gunfighter's thumb cycling a revolver's hammer between shots. This wasn't the slow, theatrical, cocking Hollywood shows. It was a smooth, nearly unconscious action that kept single-action revolvers firing almost as rapidly as later double-action designs. The technique required developing a thick callus on the shooting hand's thumb and establishing muscle memory through thousands upon thousands of repetitions. Professional gunfighters would draw, fire, roll their thumb to cock the hammer, then fire again in a continuous rhythm that appeared impossibly rapid to observers unfamiliar with the method. Proficient practitioners could fire aim shots from single-action revolvers at speeds matching or surpassing many shooters using double-action guns. The secret was maintaining their grip and sight alignment throughout, keeping the revolver perfectly steady while only the thumb moved to cock the hammer. John Wesley Hardin documented firing and recocking his Colt Navy revolver so quickly that witnesses to an 1874 incident initially assumed he was firing multiple guns simultaneously. His thumb speed contributed significantly to his fearsome reputation across the frontier territories. The technique also enabled more accurate shooting than fanning because the shooter never broke their proper grip or lost sight alignment. Each round was deliberate and aimed, just delivered at remarkable velocity. Modern single-action enthusiasts occasionally rediscover thumbing methods, especially in cowboy action shooting competitions. But achieving the proficiency level frontier gunfighters developed, where the motion became completely automatic under stress, demands dedication few contemporary shooters are willing to invest in mastering. Number 13. The double-action revolver squeeze, revolutionizing the trigger pull. Imagine holding a revolver that eliminates manually cocking the hammer between shots. Just continue squeezing the trigger, and it continues firing. For frontier gunfighters accustomed to single-action revolvers, the double-action mechanism felt like controlling lightning, though mastering it required completely relearning shooting fundamentals. Early double-action revolvers like the Colt Lightning and various British designs introduced a firing method that seemed genuinely revolutionary during the 1880s. Rather than the two-step process of cocking then firing, shooters could pull the trigger straight through in one extended heavy pull that both cocked and dropped the hammer. The method demanded substantial trigger finger strength and precise control. That long, heavy trigger pull could easily disturb aim if the shooter lacked proper training. Professional gunfighters adopting double-action revolvers invested countless hours dry firing to build finger strength and learn maintaining sight alignment throughout the entire trigger pull. Temple Houston, the renowned Texas lawman and attorney, favored double-action revolvers and developed what he termed the continuous squeeze, where he'd begin applying trigger pressure before fully extending the gun toward his target. The hammer would drop exactly as the weapon reached full extension, minimizing elapsed time between draw and shot. The approach enabled rapid follow-up shots that single-action users couldn't achieve without thumbing the hammer between rounds. In gunfights against multiple opponents, this proved a critical advantage that could determine survival. The heavy trigger pull made precision shooting more challenging than with single-action revolvers, though. Many gunfighters remain loyal to single-action designs, valuing their lighter, crisper triggers for accuracy despite slower firing rates. Number 12. Loading 5 rounds instead of 6, the empty chamber that saved lives. What if the most dangerous aspect of a frontier revolver wasn't the 5 loaded chambers, but the single empty one? Cowboys and professional gunfighters wanting to preserve their kneecaps loaded only 5 rounds, resting the hammer on an empty chamber. This wasn't excessive caution. This was pure survival instinct. Single-action revolvers of the frontier period lacked modern safety features. With all 6 chambers loaded and the hammer resting on a live round, any hammer impact could discharge the weapon. Dropping the revolver, striking it against a saddle horn, or even walking with heavy footfalls could potentially fire the gun. The practice of loading 5 and leaving the hammer on empty became so universal that experienced gunfighters could identify amateurs by their fully loaded 6 shooters. Professional scouts, lawmen, and outlaws adopted the 5-round load without exception. Texas Ranger Era 10 documented in 1887 that Ranger regulations explicitly mandated 5-round loading. referencing multiple incidents where fully loaded revolvers accidentally discharged with devastating consequences. One ranger reportedly shot himself in the thigh while mounting his horse, the hammer striking the saddle pommel. The practice demanded developing a specific loading pattern. Load 1, skip 1, load 4 more, then lower the hammer onto the empty chamber. Done properly, it became instinctive. Done incorrectly, you risked lowering the hammer on a live round. The sole exception occurred when trouble was imminent and anticipated. Some gunfighters would load that 6th round immediately before an expected confrontation, accepting the danger for the additional shot. Modern single-action revolvers frequently include safety mechanisms, making 5-round loading unnecessary. Number 11. The border roll reload. The rapid reload frontier fighters perfected. Picture yourself in an active gunfight, your revolver empty, fumbling with individual cartridges while bullets crack past your head. The border roll reload transformed this vulnerable moment into a fluid, rapid action that could return you to the fight faster than any adversary anticipated. Developed along the Texas-Mexico border during the 1870s, this technique involved opening the revolver's loading gate, rotating the cylinder with the weak hand, while employing gravity and a rolling wrist motion to dump spent brass. The shooter then used their weak hand to feed fresh rounds into chambers while continuing to rotate the cylinder. The critical element was the rolling motion. Rather than holding the gun horizontal and attempting to shake out stubborn spent casings, shooters would angle the gun approximately 45 degrees and roll their wrist, using centrifugal force and gravity in combination to clear the chambers. Fresh cartridges could then be inserted rapidly while maintaining this angle. Professional gunfighters could reload all 6 chambers in under 15 seconds using this method, remarkable speed for single-action revolvers requiring individual chamber loading. Some became so skilled they could reload while moving, using cover, or even while mounted. The technique demanded specific hand positioning and motor control requiring months to develop correctly. Fumbling the reload during combat frequently proved fatal, so practitioners drilled the motion until it became completely automatic. Bat Masterson documented using a border roll reload during an 1878 gunfight in Dodge City, smoothly reloading while retreating toward cover. Witnesses reported his hands moved in a continuous blur, spent casings dropping, and fresh rounds entering in what appeared to be a single coordinated motion. Number 10. Shooting from retention position when the fight got personal. Imagine someone lunging at you from arm's reach. No time exists to extend your weapon. No opportunity to aim. You're locked in a wrestling match with a gun trapped between your bodies. Retention position shooting addressed this terrifying scenario that modern defensive shooters rarely train for, but frontier gunfighters encountered constantly. The technique involved holding the revolver tight to the body, frequently pressed against the ribcage or maintained at waist level, while firing directly into an attacker at contact distance. The gun never extended outward. The shooter would rotate their body to create separation between themselves and the threat, while keeping the revolver locked in tight against their torso. This method appeared regularly in saloon brawls and close-quarters knife fights, where gunfighters found themselves grappling with opponents before achieving proper shooting position. The retention position prevented opponents from stripping the gun away while still allowing the shooter to fire. Wild Bill Hickok employed retention position shooting during an 1869 fight in Hays City, Kansas, when an intoxicated soldier grabbed for his weapon. Hickok rotated his body, keeping his revolver pinned against his ribcage, and fired upward through the soldier's torso at point-blank distance. The technique required absolute confidence in your weapon's reliability because malfunctions at contact distance frequently proved fatal. Shooters also needed careful awareness of the cylinder gap's position, as escaping hot gases could burn their own torso if positioned incorrectly. Modern retention position shooting has been rediscovered by defensive tactics instructors, but the frontier version was even more aggressive and demanded greater comfort with contact distance violence than most contemporary training addresses. Number 9. The twist draw, turning your whole body into the weapon. What if the fastest draw wasn't about hand speed whatsoever, but about how explosively you could rotate your torso? The twist draw exploited the body's strongest, fastest muscle groups, transforming the entire gunfighter into a rotating platform that brought the weapon into firing position through core rotation rather than arm extension. The technique began with the gunfighter facing slightly away from the threat, hand positioned near the holster. At the draw moment, the shooter would explosively rotate their hips and torso toward the target while simultaneously drawing the revolver. The rotation provided momentum, accelerating the gun's movement, while the hip rotation naturally aligned the gun with the target. Professional gunfighters mastering this technique achieved draw-to-first shot times appearing impossibly fast because they weren't depending solely on arm and hand muscles. They were harnessing their entire body's rotational power, generating speed through kinetic linking, comparable to how baseball players generate bat velocity. Dallas Staudenmaier, the legendary El Paso lawman, was renowned for his twist draw. Witnesses to his 1881 gunfight that killed 3 men in under 5 seconds reported he appeared to spin like a dancer, his revolver materializing in his hand almost before the rotation finished. The twist draw required extensive practice to avoid destroying accuracy. The rotational momentum needed precise control, bringing the gun on target without overshooting. Many attempted the technique and found themselves spinning past their target or losing balance entirely. Modern competitive shooters occasionally experiment with twist draw variations, but few develop the body control and practice required to execute it effectively under stress. The technique demands a different biomechanics understanding than contemporary shooting instruction typically provides. Number 8. One-handed shooting exclusively. When two hands was never an option, imagine being restricted to using only one hand for every shooting aspect: drawing, aiming, firing, and reloading. Modern shooters train with two-handed grips for stability and precision. Frontier gunfighters enjoyed no such luxury. Everything was executed one-handed, and they developed techniques transforming this limitation into refined skill. The standard Old West shooting method was exclusively one-handed. The shooting hand drew and fired, while the weak hand rested on the hip, hung at the side, or controlled reins, held a knife, or gripped another gun. This wasn't a stylistic choice. It reflected frontier life reality where shooters might be controlling horses, opening doors, or gripping saddle horns while shooting. Professional gunfighters developed extraordinary one-handed control. Their shooting hand wrists became exceptionally powerful, managing heavy revolver recoil that modern shooters struggle with even using both hands. The technique demanded perfect trigger control because any shooting hand deviation translated directly to point of impact. Accuracy decreased beyond 20 yards compared to two-handed shooting, but frontier gunfights rarely exceeded 15 yards. At those distances, a skilled one-handed shooter could deliver devastating precision. Wild Bill Hickok's 75-yard shot, killing Davis Tutt in 1865, was executed one-handed, an almost supernatural marksmanship display. The one-handed technique also facilitated specific tactics like shooting while using cover, where exposing only one arm and shoulder minimized the gunfighter's profile. Shooting around corners, from behind obstacles, or from prone positions all benefited from one-handed methods. Modern competitive shooting in disciplines like NRA bullseye and some cowboy action shooting preserves one-handed techniques, but most defensive shooting instruction emphasizes two-handed firing. Number 7. The cavalry charge firing method, delivering accurate fire at full gallop. Picture thundering across plains at 20 miles per hour on horseback, attempting to hit targets while your mount's hooves pound earth in a bone-jarring rhythm. Cavalry charge firing demanded techniques so specialized that modern shooters, even highly experienced ones, find them virtually impossible to execute. The method involved timing shots to coincide with specific moments in the horse's gait when all 4 hooves left the ground. In that brief suspension instant, the ride smoothed just enough to permit an aimed shot. Cavalry troopers invested months learning to feel this moment and coordinate their trigger press with it. Shooters would extend their arm fully, using body tension creating a stable platform despite violent motion. The key was maintaining iron control of the reins with the weak hand, while the shooting hand operated independently. Any loss of horse control during the charge could prove instantly fatal. The 7th Cavalry under Custer drilled this technique extensively during the 1870s. Troopers were expected to hit man-sized targets at 20 yards while charging, a standard demanding extraordinary combined horsemanship and shooting skill. The technique's psychological impact on foot soldiers was devastating. Mounted cavalry charging at full speed while delivering accurate fire created panic in formations accustomed to stationary shooters. Many infantry units broke and fled, simply from the terror of cavalry charge fire. The method carried significant limitations, though. Reloading while mounted and moving was nearly impossible. Cavalry charges were typically one-shot engagements, after which troopers had to rein in, dismount, or transition to sabers for close combat. Modern mounted shooting competitions attempt recreating cavalry charge techniques, but participants quickly discover the immense difficulty combining horsemanship and marksmanship at speed.
Number 6. Shooting under the arm. The last resort defensive technique.
Imagine grappling with an opponent who seized your gun hand. You can't bring the weapon to bear conventionally. Your only option is firing underneath your own arm, essentially shooting backward while protecting the gun from being torn away. This desperate technique saved lives in brutal close-quarters fights. The method involved twisting the shooting hand and wrist, angling the revolver backward under the shooter's arm while the weak hand fought controlling the opponent. The shot was essentially blind, aimed through body positioning rather than sights. Doc Holliday allegedly employed an underarm shot during an 1880 brawl in Prescott, Arizona, when a drunk miner grabbed his gun hand. Holliday twisted, fired under his own arm, and the miner collapsed. The technique required absolute trust in your weapon's reliability and careful awareness of the cylinder gap's position, as hot gases could burn your own torso.
Number 5. The reverse grip method. Transforming your gun into a club.
What happens when a gunfight degrades into a knife fight, but you're holding a revolver? Frontier gunfighters sometimes address this problem by reversing their grip, holding the gun like a hammer and employing it as an impact weapon while retaining the option to fire. This dual-purpose technique transformed revolvers into brutal close combat implements. The reverse grip involved rotating the gun 180 degrees so the barrel pointed toward the shooter and the grip extended forward like a hammer. In this configuration, the solid steel frame and heavy cylinder became devastating impact weapons capable of crushing skulls or shattering bones. Some gunfighters developed hybrid techniques where they'd strike with the reversed gun while simultaneously transitioning it back to conventional grip for a follow-up shot. The transition demanded exceptional hand control and practice, but created a fighting style brutally effective in saloon brawls. Wild Bill Hickok documented using his revolver as a club in several fights, though accounts don't specify whether he fully reversed his grip or simply employed the gun as an improvised hammer in conventional grip. Temple Houston reportedly practiced reverse grip transitions, though his actual combat use of the technique remains unverified. The method's primary advantage was psychological. Opponents expecting a gunfight suddenly found themselves in a brawl, where the same weapon they feared as a firearm became a club swinging at their skull. That mental shift frequently created an opening for a decisive strike. Reverse grip shooting accuracy was virtually non-existent, however. The technique was pure desperation, employed when conventional shooting had failed and the fight had degraded into hand-to-hand combat. Professional gunfighters viewed it as a final resort. Number 4. Walking fire technique. Advancing while shooting continuously. Picture walking directly toward an opponent while firing continuously, each step bringing you closer as your revolver barks repeatedly. Walking fire transformed gunfighters into advancing walls of lead that psychologically shattered opponents before the bullets did. This aggressive technique reversed natural instinct to seek cover and instead weaponized forward movement. The method required supreme confidence and extensive practice. Shooters would advance at a steady walking pace, firing and recocking their single-action revolvers in rhythm with their steps. The key was maintaining smooth forward motion while executing perfect trigger control and hammer thumbing. Each shot was aimed deliberately, despite the movement. Professional practitioners learned timing their trigger press to coincide with the brief moment between steps when their body achieved maximum stability. The resulting fire was slower than rapid shooting from a static position, but carried devastating psychological impact. Witnesses to walking fire described it as terrifying. An opponent watching a gunfighter calmly advance while bullets snapped past created a psychological effect, frequently causing the target to panic, miss their shots, or break and flee entirely. Many gunfights ended not because the walking shooter scored hits, but because their opponent's nerve completely shattered. Dallas Staudenmeier employed walking fire in his famous 1881 gunfight in El Paso. Accounts describe him advancing steadily down the street, firing with each step, while his 3 opponents frantically returned fire and missed. All three died without landing a single hit on Stoudemire. The technique demanded absolute coolness under fire. Natural human instinct screams to seek cover when being shot at. Walking fire required overriding that instinct through iron discipline and training. Number 3. The double tap before it had a name. Pioneering rapid paired shots. Imagine firing not one shot, but two, so quickly the second sounds like an echo of the first. Frontier gunfighters discovered that paired shots stopped opponents far more reliably than single rounds, anticipating the modern double tap. Experience taught them that adrenaline, alcohol, and resolve often let wounded enemies keep fighting. Two rapid hits greatly increased the chance of immediate incapacitation. John Wesley Hardin became famous for this approach, with witnesses reporting shots fired almost simultaneously. Mastering the technique required exceptional speed and control, and many gunfighters never achieved it, relying instead on single, carefully aimed shots. Number 2. Instinctive shooting at moving targets. Leading shots through pure instinct. Picture an outlaw spurring his horse at full gallop, dust cloud trailing behind as he flees. You've got seconds to make the shot, and he's moving at 15 miles per hour. Instinctive shooting at moving targets required frontier gunfighters to develop skills modern hunters would recognize: reading movement, calculating lead, and firing where the target would be rather than where it was. The technique demanded extraordinary visual processing and hand-eye coordination. Shooters had to track the target's movement, estimate speed and trajectory, and intuitively place their shot ahead of the target's position. This calculation happened in fractions of a second, processed through trained instinct rather than conscious thought. Professional gunfighters practiced on fleeing animals, moving wagons, and running men to develop these skills. The best practitioners could hit mounted riders at 50 yards, while the targets were at full gallop, a feat requiring reading the horse's gait pattern and predicting its path. The psychological aspect was critical. Shooters had to overcome the instinct aiming directly at what they saw, and instead trust their calculation of where the target would be. This mental shift came only through extensive practice and experience. Wild Bill Hickok demonstrated moving target skills during an 1868 buffalo hunt, reportedly dropping multiple running buffalo with his revolver, a feat witnesses considered almost supernatural. His ability reading animal movement and leading shots became part of his legendary status. The technique required understanding different movement patterns. A man running straight away needed different lead than a man dodging laterally. A horse at full gallop versus a horse at canter required different calculations. Experienced shooters developed internal databases of movement patterns and appropriate leads. Number 1. The matched pair coordination system. Mastering two guns as one weapon. The deadliest gunfighting technique of the Wild West wasn't a single method. It was a complete fighting system, integrating two revolvers into a coordinated weapon platform that modern shooters find almost impossible to replicate. The match pair coordination system turned legendary gunfighters into ambidextrous killing machines, whose skills appear almost superhuman today. True masters developed the ability operating both guns simultaneously and independently, making their left and right hands function as separate weapon systems. This wasn't Hollywood-style spray and pray. It was carefully orchestrated fire enabling engagement of multiple targets, or overwhelming single opponents with firepower no lone revolver could match. The training regimen was brutal. Shooters invested years building ambidextrous skills, practicing drawing both guns simultaneously, firing in coordinated patterns, and reloading while maintaining tactical awareness. Advanced techniques included split targeting, where each hand engaged different threats simultaneously. Wild Bill Hickok's matched pair of Navy Colts represented the gold standard. His ability drawing and firing both revolvers simultaneously, hitting separate targets with both hands, became legendary across the frontier.